Hello, this is David Bernstein, founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the SpeechCast, a joint venture of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and the Speech Project of the Jewish Journal. Today, we're going to be discussing trans issues and the intersection with the Jewish community, and I'm really delighted to have with us Seth Rainess. Seth is trans, he's a trans man, he's Jewish. He's politically interesting. I'll let him define himself. He is a speaker, an author, an entrepreneur, and somebody I've gotten to know a bit. The other person is Zander Keig. Zander is a friend and a business partner, but not Jewish, but he's really introduced me to Seth, and I'm really glad to have Zander on this with us. You're our first non-Jewish guest, Zander. So,
all right.
So yeah, absolutely. So you're not, but not last.
Let's hear it for the goys.
Let's hear it for the goys. So I'll ask questions, and I'll let you all decide who jumps in and when. You'll figure it out. So Seth, I want to hear a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? How did you grow up Jewishly? How did that fit into your life?
Well, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. That's my home. And, typical Jewish life, Hebrew school, Sunday school, bar mitzvah, the whole 9 yards. It's funny because when I was in college, I was going to be a rabbi. And that's a whole nother story, but that didn't go the way I'd like it to go. We had some meeting of the minds between being conservative and going to a reform rabbinical school, because that's the way it was back then.
So you were politically conservative back then? Yeah.
Well, and conservative Judaism, not reform. So.
Oh, I see.
But at those days, only women, because that's what I was back then, were allowed to be ordained. I mean, it's henceforth has grown, but that's the way it was.
So we could have been interviewing Rabbi Rainess, but.
Yeah, maybe, or I would have been thrown out. Who knows?
Right. You never know.
Or defrocked, or whatever it's called.
Right. So Zander, you're not Jewish, but tell us a little. Where'd you grow up? California, right?
I did. I grew up in Torrance, which is a coastal suburb of Los Angeles County. I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s there, right by the beach. It was a great little, surfer beachside community. My family is actually from Mexico, so I'm first generation, raised Catholic, Roman Catholic, went to Spanish Mass on Saturdays with my grandmother. I am actually a seminary graduate where I took several classes in Judaism. So, I learned, I of course never had a lack of appreciation for Judaism, but because of the studies that I did, I gained even more of an appreciation, especially around some of the works that I read that had to do with the Dalai Lama, convening discussions with Jewish rabbis and rebbes to learn how do you continue your faith in Exodus, which I found really beautiful, just that exchange between the Dalai Lama and rabbis and rebbes. So so that's me.
I remember when the Dalai Lama was in Washington for a Seder years back. So you're both trans men. You both had a very distinct experience. You've both been trans for many years. You're not. It's not a recent transition. And I'm curious to know about how this current ideological moment around trans issues has affected your lives personally, and how you see it. Why don't we start with you, Seth?
Well, what do you exactly mean by this moment?
Well, I mean, it seems that all of a sudden trans issues are sort of front and center of the public debate. We're hearing a lot from people who are railing against transphobia, and there's issues like J.K. Rowling and the like. There's all these issues about teenage transitioning and so forth. And it seems to be just a highly politicized time right now. I'm not sure. I heard a lot about trans issues even 5 years ago. So how is that? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you'll educate me on that.
You quoted it right. Politicized.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big word. I mean, Zander and I, we know this goes back. Trans people have been around for decades, but I mean, really to the world where you couldn't hide under a stone anymore. I'd say the last 10 or 15 years is when the internet, came into being and people started putting out YouTube videos and legitimate stuff from organizations where people could find out decent information, not something down a black alley somewhere. It's at least easily 10 years, maybe a little more. Because when I started writing my book back in 2014, there was enough information, not a lot. It's grown exponentially since then. And so now, everybody wants to shine the spotlight on something that's been doing, I think, fairly well amongst the doctors and the areas of the country who are, participating in the medical, psychological, surgical, emotional transitioning of young adults and adults as well.
Zander, what's your take?
Well, so I think there is a significant increase in information that's being shared and made public. I think it's social media is a primary vehicle for that, and especially individuals identified as influencers. I don't really know how that gets, how people get labeled as influencers. Maybe they label themselves as influencers. And so I'm not part of social media. So I think that's one of the things that sets me apart, in that I have LinkedIn, but I don't have Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I'm not involved in any of those platforms. And so I'm not part of that general social media influencer world or the message that's being spread out that way. But, I've been part of LGBT community as far as out since 1980. I was 14 years old when I came out as lesbian. And then when I was 18 is when I first started to get involved in the community, on the ground doing, advocacy and activism and outreach. So, I mean, that's a long time ago. I'm almost 55 years old. So I've been part of this community beyond, just being trans. I mean, in 2000 is really when I started to embrace an understanding of being trans, but it still wasn't till another 5 years later that I started the medical transition. So I've sort of seen my own evolution while also watching the changes in the community, which I think really social media has been a primary impactor on that.
So our friend Buck Angel, I think who you introduced me to, it was on a podcast I did with Hold My Drink and Counterweight. Excellent guest, by the way, hilarious, dynamic, and all that you'd expect. He has a theory that one of the reasons it's become so politicized is because of trans women. And he believes that trans women are, we're natal males and have a lot of those qualities, and they tend to be aggressive, and they're sort of taking over the discourse in a way that you wouldn't necessarily see from a trans man. What do you think about that theory?
It may be true. I mean, I do know that a lot of trans males go stealth. They transition and they just want to live their life. And it's hard, I think, for trans females, especially if they transition late in life, because they do have, natal male characteristics that aren't so easy to, and I don't want to say erase or cover up, but change. Whereas going the other way, as soon as I grew a beard or a mustache and unfortunately lost my hair, nobody called me she or what, or a woman or anything. But then again, before I transitioned, they kept calling me him. So, who knows? But I think men have an easier time just sort of doing what they want to do. And I don't want to say fading, because they're every bit of a person, but they live a life. And they may not even be included or even tangentially related to the community. They just want to live their lives. And I'm in there with one toe because I educate people, but I'm not immersed in the community. There's more parts to me than that. I'm a small part of that, and I have other facets of my life. And that's what I'm hoping when I educate people and talk to people, that they're going to do that as well, and go on and live their lives and be productive in many different ways.
Zander?
Yeah, I think there, just like there are many different sub communities within these various communities of LGBT. Within the trans community, it's similar that in that way. And what I mean by that is that if you divide people up into three general categories in our community, trans men, trans women, and then non-binary or gender non-conforming, gender diverse, right? When you look at the trans female or trans women community, there are going to be trans women who came through the gay community. Maybe they were drag queens or female impersonators or just run-of-the-mill gay men who then realized who they were and they started their transition. And then you have trans women who come from the straight community where they're married. They may or may not have been a cross-dresser. And I think that those things are very different influences on the type of woman this trans woman is, like how they present to the world, how they're read by the world, their understanding of how LGBT community works. So if you have somebody who's been through drag culture, female impersonator culture, maybe even cross-dressing cultures, they know a lot more about LGBT community than those trans women who were completely in the straight world, the cis world, married, maybe even having kids. Then all of a sudden they come into the community and they bring that persona, that character, that skill set that was cultivated in them in order to survive in the world of business and family and community. They bring that into the LGBT community, and maybe that means they have a more commanding presence. They're able to more clearly articulate their wants and their needs in a way that maybe some of us who were socialized as females didn't get that same training, didn't get that same socialization. We got some of it maybe in lesbian community, but that's typically going to be a little bit later, right? It wasn't cultivated in me as a young girl in the same way that maybe a man who was a Boy Scout and an Eagle Scout and then goes on to get an MBA and then is working in the corporate world and sort of running a company, and then all of a sudden they transition. Like, that's a completely different life story than a lot of trans men. And so I think that's just the way it is. And I think that just like in lesbian or in feminist community, this ideal of women being strong and powerful and assertive and outspoken, unfortunately, sometimes when trans women come into the community and they have those same qualities, there's a negativity that can frame it because it's a different kind of assertiveness than what is typically found within like a cis woman or cis female, assertiveness. Like, there's some differences, perhaps, like, I don't know that in I'm just speaking in generalities. I think there's also an issue about branding, right? I think that corporations are now in the world of branding, and they want to align with people, and they're going to align with influencers who are the most visible. And so I think exactly what Seth said, some trans women, especially if they start their transition later in life, the testosterone has done what it's done to their body, to their voice, to their hair patterns. And so, there's different kinds of hurdles that they need to overcome than we do when we start testosterone. And so if you're going to be visible because you're like 6'4" and really broad shouldered and you have a commanding presence, why not just use it? Go right ahead. It's not like they can just shrink and hide in a corner. So,
Sure.
In some ways I'm like, I guess if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But because of that, they do have a much more visible physical presence in our community. And they do often have a more dominant voice in our community as well.
So you may be more understated, but that's partly because you can be more understated in a way. You can be part. You don't necessarily stand out as a trans man, and so therefore it's easier for you to live the kind of life that you would otherwise have liked to live, a quieter life without making that central to your identity. Or am I misstating it?
Well, let me just go back a little and add to what Zander said. Maybe we weren't socially conditioned. I mean, listen, I watched my father and I did whatever I could, but you know what? Taking trans males aside, you just look at all the cis males, there are all kinds of males out there. And really, there isn't what is a male, So, I mean, you don't have to be beating up everybody on the corner or drawing fists or having drinking buddies. There's many, cis males, cis females married, and that's the kind of male that they are. And I think it comes down to the traits that everybody should have, just honesty and morals and principles and things like that. But what Zander was saying, it is true about trans women. And that's unfortunately the quote, man in the dress, which is a terrible thing, because they do their best to feminize. And, as much as I like Caitlyn and everything, everybody doesn't have that kind of money to fix their face and do what they can. And so I give them more credit than I would give myself, because I could blend. I don't like the word pass. I can blend in very easily. But for them, they got to put on the makeup and do the best they can just to walk out of their house. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, especially like when Zander said, if you're 6 feet and you're taller and obviously, you didn't take growth hormones when you were a kid. But one of the things though, that's very interesting, and it's because Zander and I are older, we bring in life, we bring in how to live, how to get back up on your feet when things go wrong, life. We bring that to the community where the young kids, they grew up, they're 8, they're 9, they're 12, they're 15. What do they know about life? I mean, they're lucky, to transition early if that's the path they're taking. But, I see them afraid of their shadow. I see them, when something's wrong, they quit. The backbone, the mental toolkit, the thing that is very important to me is what goes beyond the surgical and the medical, if you choose or choose not to do it, is your mind. And how are you going to get through life? Because everybody has a tough life. If it doesn't come now, it comes tomorrow, it comes 3 months, it comes a year from now. Nobody gets away unless they die from a hard life, because we all experience it. I don't care if it's medical, surgical, traumatic, you get fired, you can't get a job. Everybody experiences it. And these people need to be able to, in this community, to get a little bit more, as I say, alligator skin, and to go through it. I mean, because right now we have better than we ever did in a lot of places, at least in this country, and I'm seeing it in places you wouldn't even think of. We have people who are willing and they're legitimate, and they follow the standards, the WPAS standards, to help people transition and continue on that marathon, because that's what it is.
So both of you said in your own way that being trans is obviously a significant part of your life, but you're complex people. You have a lot going on. How does the trans part of your life manifest itself? What are the things that you do in the trans community? Why don't I start with you on that, Seth?
One of the things that I do, I mean, like I said, I'm on the board for Jersey Shore PFLAG, and I'm on the advisory board for Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I just try to add really education, common sense, and advice for people, because, I often say to people that I'm not gay, but I often say to people, when I used to go into gay bars and there'd be a guy my age at the end of a bar drinking, and these young kids would come in and they'd make fun of that person. I often say that's the person that's allowed you to come into this bar, because they put down their life, they put down everything for the years that you don't even know about, so that you actually have permission to walk into this bar and not look left and right to think you're going to get arrested. So they don't realize that the people that have laid down a lot. And this is a trans community, and this is the gay community, this is everything for what these young kids, the 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds really have gone through. There's been a lot of people coming before them. And so for me, I just try to find out and meet people where they're at. And if I can help them, whether it's a doctor or wherever it is, try to push them along to get the right help and the right professionals, if that's the way they want to go.
Zander, how about you? You do a lot in your practice, in your well-being, wellness, and belonging practice?
He does more than I do on a daily basis.
We just do very different things, Seth. They need all of us, right? We're both contributing to the community in different ways. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm mostly doing clinical work, and so I am a member of WPATH, which is World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They've been around since 1979. It's a worldwide association, professional association, and so we have an education arm where we provide courses for people to become more culturally aware aware and competent around transgender health, both primary care and behavioral health care. Well, in addition to specialty care like endocrinology and plastic surgery. And one of the things I've done is I've gone through the training program myself to become certified as a gender specialist with WPATH, but I'm also on faculty with their education program. And I more recently became a mentor. So now I'm working with people who are seeking that certification. So I'm doing a lot within the clinical world, within like the trans healthcare on the clinical side. I also do a lot of mentorship. I realized early on when I was starting my gender transition that it would probably be a good idea to have a mentor. And so I reached out to a person who's considered a pioneer in the community, Jameson Green. He was living in the same part of the country that I was at that time, which was Northern California. And thankfully, he agreed to become my mentor. And over the years, the last 15 years, we've collaborated on multiple projects together. But I learned from that experience how valuable mentorship is. So I've carried it forward. So I've been the mentor for many people. And I'm sure Seth is also both a formal and informal mentor, because both he and I have also published books. And I think that that's a form of mentorship, because people pick those up and they learn about us and about not us personally, but they learn about our community and our needs through these means.
Exactly. I mean, I'm a member of WPATH too, and you're right, Jameson. My first recognition of, wow, I can do this, was Jameson's book. So yeah, and he wrote the foreword to my book, which I'm grateful for. But yeah, I mean, you know, as big as you think the community is, if you're in it enough, we know a lot of people, and we're pleased to know them and recommend them whenever we have to.
So you both happen to be not exactly political leftist. Am I correct in that? And I'm wondering how that has played out for you in these very ideologically charged times, when most trans activism would be considered, part of the left or even far left, in terms of the demands on society and its sort of, structural patriarchy and cisnormativity and the rest. How have you navigated that? What has that meant for you personally in these very challenging and polarized ideological times? You want to start, Seth?
Well, first off, I am not an activist. I'm an advocate. Big difference. People do confuse that. I'm conservative in my thinking. I don't agree with the far left, but I don't let that get in the way of me trying to advocate and help in the community, because you have to compartmentalize. That's how everybody lives their life. If you don't compartmentalize and one thing takes over you, it's going to rule every single thing you do. And I don't agree with it. I don't allow it. I don't believe in the far right. What they're doing, the very far right, I think they don't have the correct information, but then the left wants to, water everything down with so many different names. You don't know where your head's spinning. I care more about the person. What is their journey? How are they going to live their life? And getting them to deal with whatever it is they're dealing with, whether it's family, issues that are coming up, because the family's not in a line, whether it's a religious thing, anything that deals with that person emotionally, because I don't care where you go, you take yourself with you. And if you can't get a grip on those things, which everybody has to do in life, some never do it, where are you? And to me, I look at that person and I try and help that person. What is it that you need to conquer? What is it that you want to do? What's your next step? Where are your steps? What are you going? Keep moving forward so that you can get out there, get through what you need to get through as far as you want to go, and live your life. And I ride the middle, because I ride the middle called common sense.
Zander, how about for you?
Yeah, I would encapsulate myself as a centrist as well. I find that I'm not capable of taking extreme positions on things, and I never have been. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by extreme is any point of view that either endorses or puts forward their ideas through violence. And so that would be the far left and the far right. right? They're using violent tactics, either physical or verbal violence, by attacking people's character, by shaming and ridiculing people, by destroying property, and by harming people's bodies. Like all of that, I don't care if what side of the political aisle you're on. If you condone, endorse, or participate in violence, that's where I draw the line. I'm not going to go near any of that. And so, I mean, I was a conscientious objector when I served in the U.S. Coast Guard, which is a peace, branch of the military. So it runs deep for me, these ideals. As a social worker, foundational to our worldview is that we meet people where they are. We take into consideration the person and their environment. And so my goal would be to work with people with a mind of curiosity, who also have a mind of curiosity, who aren't automatically going to reject me because I'm not a leftist, or reject me because I'm trans, right? And so I have found a lot of solidarity with people that others would think are supposedly our enemies, people who are evangelical Christians. It turns out that there are liberal and conservative evangelical Christians. And so that's one thing I learned in seminary. And so I've been able to have many, many dialogues with Christians, and supposedly we're not supposed to be able to have dialogues with them. We're not supposed to be able to become friends with them. And I have found that that's just not the case. There's a difference between people who are closed off and rigid in their thinking, and people who are open. And so I find these people on a wide spectrum of political leanings and social leanings, ideological leanings. So I don't have any problem with people that are conservative or religious, unless because of those things, they have a problem with people like me. And even then I might still be okay, right? Like I've had many conversations with people who tell me, I'm going to pray for you, or, God made you a female or a woman, you'll always be that. And I don't push back on people like that. I just sort of, I'm more inquisitive with them. I'll be like, oh, well, that's really interesting. And what leads you to believe that? Or, what's your intention in saying that to me? Or I'll just say, thank you. If they say, I'm praying for you.
Right.
If somebody tells me, hey, people might think you're a man, but I know you're a woman. Part of what I do sometimes is I'll say, well, technically I'm female. That is my sex. I was born with and female was put on my birth certificate. I did have a surgery to remove, female reproductive organs. Like I did menstruate. I'm not dumb, right? Like I understand biology. And I think right then and there, when I do that kind of conversation with somebody, they're expecting me to reject them, to push back on them, to call them out, so to speak, which I don't do call out. And I don't do it. And so all of a sudden I've opened this door for, oh, well, that Zander, he's reasonable,
Right.
And for me, that's enough. That's an open enough door that I have found that I can then walk away. I don't need to invite them over for dinner. They're not going to become my best friend, but I don't need to have hostility toward them. I don't need to do anything against them.
Exactly. I mean, my whole thing is to educate people. And usually when I'm done, I say, now you know the truth, and what you do with it is up to you. And like when Zander said, I'll have some people, well, you were born a woman, and what are you going to do when you meet God? I said, I'm not going to worry at all. I mean, you have to, it's like when kids get bullied and they come up to you and they go, oh, you're trans, you're this and that and the other. I teach the little kids to say, well, what do you want to know about it? I'll tell you anything you want. And they go like this, and because they're not expecting it. If you disarm them with kindness, they're either going to go away or you just, like Zander said, if they say you used to be a woman, I go, thanks. I didn't think I looked so good, and I disarm them because you can't go down that. I'm like Zander. I'm not an extremist. I'm not quoting the Bible on anybody. Even if I could quote the Bible, I don't. And I'm just looking to, if someone comes up to me and they ask me something and they're not belligerent, I have no problem educating them. But if they're going to be, nuts, I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe you got to get the answer from somebody else, because I'm not going to sit there and cause a scene. It's just, it's not worth it, because they're like Zander said, they're already closed-minded.
I think Seth, when you brought up this idea of bullies, right? We encounter bullies too. We have bullies in our community. There are people who try to bully us out of our point of view, out of the way we see the world, the kind of people we befriend, the ideas that we have. So they're using these bullying tactics toward community members, and that, that's just really sad.
Right. I mean, they're fighting within. I always used to say the Jew is the Jew's own worst enemy. But I mean, they're fighting within, but for little kids, they've got to be armed with a script from a play, so that, and they say it by rote, so that when it happens, they just spit it off and they roll it off their back like water off a duck, and they have to learn. And you'd have to learn it anyway. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother said, you go out and take care of your problems. You're not coming home without solving that problem. You have to learn to stand up and fight. And that goes for and I don't mean fist fight, but that goes for anybody in today's world. You have to learn when to walk away, what to say, a couple of different statements, and just move on. And I think our younger generation's paralyzed because they've got like social media and all that stuff. And I tell them to delete them, block them, and get rid of them.
So there's these hot button issues that are probably harder to ignore than you'd like. Some of them are around, teenage transitions. And I don't mean that, those are real issues for real people that they have to face at home with their therapists and so forth. But I'm talking about the politicization of those issues, and also, with trans athletes, for example, trans women in prisons and female prisons, all these things have really become hot political topics in the last couple of years and even the last couple of months. How do you think about those issues? How do you navigate those issues?
I mean, I remember a few years back when the bathroom became a big deal, and then all of a sudden, it quieted down.
Yeah.
I mean, and I used to joke about it when I would teach it, because people would say, "Oh, man, in the women's bathroom," and I would say, "Well, how do you know that? Are you looking under the stall? If you're looking under the stall, you're the one that's got the problem."
Right.
You have to kind of, put it out there. But I mean, this business of surgery, the surgery doesn't happen. If surgery happens on little kids, they're a shyster. Okay. And our community, I can tell you, for a long time with intersex, have been against, quote, childhood surgery. They want, that child to grow up and make their own decision. Nobody that I know of in the professional world, WPATH and so forth and so on, they don't operate on 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or wherever they're trying to push from the right. I mean, that's where they're wrong. They're wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's unwarranted concern about little children having surgeries. Typically, little children are going to go through what's called a social transition, where either at home and or at home in school, they may wear a different set of clothing. They may have a different haircut. They might have a nickname that they ask the teacher and the students to call them by. But they're typically, there's not going to be any medical interventions. With puberty blockers were invented for precocious puberty. So when children go into puberty when they're like 8, 9, 10 years old. Right. And so they've been around for decades, and that's what they're used for. And so for trans kids, really the best practice is to wait until puberty actually starts, and then go through the process of determining, do we initiate puberty? Do we stop the puberty temporarily, or do we just go right into cross-sex hormone therapy, right? And that's a decision that has to be made, because are you 11 or are you 15 when that's happening? And so the puberty blockers just buy kids a little bit of time once they've initiated puberty, because remember, again, if this is a natal male child, right, a biologically male child, that testosterone is going to do all kinds of nearly irreversible things that if they do get reversed, it's through a lot of surgery, right? Like removing the Adam's apple, or just hours and hours of laser or electrolysis hair removal, right, on the face, on the chest. I mean, it's just expensive and painful. Especially it's expensive if insurance doesn't cover it. So that little period of time where maybe there's some blockers, it's not going to do, long-term damage to the kid. It's just going to buy them that little bit of time for them to get to an age where they can actually make a better informed decision in conjunction with their family and their therapist and their doctor.
So I interviewed, along with our friend Jennifer Richmond, on the Hold My Drink Counterweight podcast, Deborah Hayden, who is a British trans female, trans woman activist. She's quite the contrarian in her own community, and she's written extensively about it. And I asked her at one point, because she said something, I don't remember precisely what. So, well, do you feel female? And she looked at me, she goes, no, I feel like me. And I'm just curious as to how you answer that, how you think about that, because it made me think about how I'd answer that question as well.
For me, what does that mean? You know, everybody has a different opinion of what feel is. The best thing that I can say is, even though my mother taught me early to really, you know, grow alligator skin and let stuff roll off your back, I was just very independent, because back in the day, I had to carve a life that I didn't know what it was going to look like. I'm thrilled to be where I'm sitting right now, because it may have been something back in the day, but you would never find information about it, because you're going to go to the Dewey Decimal System in the library. And what were you going to ask for anyway? And so now for me, the way my mental being was for all those years, it's sort of aligned. In other words, I'm not this woman that looks like a man, or this woman that is real tough, you know, like a man. I am the same person, but I'm in the outside wrapper that matches what my mental being has been for all these years. So really, it was like just sliding into another dress code. Even though I wore this, I think the facial hair, and fortunately the loss of hair, you know, sort of solidified who I look like from the outside now. And I've had to, I had to say to myself, you know, you're a man. Maybe somebody's afraid to walk on the street in front of you. You know, things that, like, again, we were not brought up with, that we weren't cognizant of. But in general, I'm me, you know, and I proved it by how people, I'm sorry about that. By how people treated me. You know, I still had the same manners. I still had whatever I had. I don't think that I became more manly. I mean, I just fit into the way I look, if that makes sense. I never think about what is it like to be. I mean, I've read, you know, all kinds of motivational things, what men should do, and, you know, the rules. I wouldn't
12
say
rules of life or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, I just watched my father, because that's the kind of gentleman he was, and I picked up on all his cues as a child. Seriously.
Zander?
Yeah, I mean, well, quickly, I would just say I similarly, I had a good role model as a father, and he raised me as a single parent. So I think that was, I didn't realize it at the time that he was a good role model for me. As a man, I would just, you know, I considered him to be just a good role model as a person growing up. But, you know, coming out as lesbian at really young age, it was obvious to me that I was set apart from the other women in my family, and most women that I interacted with, in the sense that, you know, my personality was very different. The way I saw the world was different. The way I interacted with people was different. And so the transness was just another layer to that. So I didn't have such an extreme, like, from this to this kind of experience, which I think some trans women who come from the straight world do have a from this to this, right? I think that's part of the difference here too, between that other guest and us. The other thing is that I have no idea what it means to feel like a man, think like a man. You know, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I bet if I asked 10 men, they'd have 10 different answers. I don't think that's a reality. And so when I hear people say that, you know, oh, I've always been a woman, or I've always been a man, I've thought like a man, I felt like a man. It's I ask the same question. I'm like, what does that feel like? Because I don't know what that feels like. And so I'm always curious about it. And I think a lot of times people are basing it on stereotypes of gender roles, right? And so that's one of the benefits of coming from the lesbian community, is that I completely, I was contemptuous to gender roles. I rejected gender roles.
You rejected them as a female, and you're rejecting them as a male.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. It's like, I was counter then and I'm counter now. It's just an interesting evolution. I didn't hold in high regard the norms, the expected social, roles or gender roles of women. And I'm not going to do that as a man. I'm not going to live into some idealized notion or fictional idea of what it means to be a man. I'm just going to be me. And I think that's good enough.
I agree. I think people are so busy labeling everybody. You got to do this, you got to do that. I think, like I said, if you're a good person, wherever you come from, whoever you are, you're a good person. If you're a bad person, wherever you come from, whatever you are, you're a bad person first and foremost, before anything else, before any intersections, before anything. Just, be you and be a good, moral person with good interest and I don't know. It's just, I think we overdo some of this stuff. I think we're searching to make answers where they really make them up, where they really aren't there. And then people go, oh, well, I never thought about it. I better start thinking about it, because if I don't think about it, I must not be a man. I mean, you put stuff into people's head. And
I remember I would be in social settings where it was all women, and I would hear people saying things about women, talking about women in these really generalized ways, right? Like, oh, women are so nurturing and the sisterhood is this, and, the difference between men and women is this. And I would kind of look at them and I'd be like, I've been around a lot of women who were physically abusive, who were emotionally abusive. Like, I don't know that women are any better than men. And then when I transitioned, all of a sudden, I'm hearing again, mostly from women, how terrible men are. And I'm like, now I'm in the community of men and I'm going, I'm meeting a lot of really nice men, a lot of really compassionate men, a lot of men who are very kind and have been very, very welcoming and affirming of me. And so it's like, I find that it's like the same kind of people I'm having the same conversations with. It's just now, instead about women not be idealizing women as being all good, now it's idealizing men as being all bad. It's like, countering those narratives.
Right.
What I say to those people is get a life. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Right. So Seth, going back to Jewishness for a second, how have you found being a trans man fit into or conflicted with your Jewishness? Did you ever feel othered? Did you feel included? How did that play out for you?
Well, first off, I couldn't wait to wear pants in a synagogue because, there were dress codes. And my mother used to get embarrassed, and later in life, I'm in my 40s at this point. Okay. And I finally said, I'm done with this. And my conservative temple is egalitarian. So, that wasn't an issue. And to be honest with you, I hear people quote the Bible at me. I hear Leviticus 19. I hear all that stuff. Okay. And I don't care. You do what you want to do. I mean, listen, just to go back, when my dad died, I went for Kaddish for 11 months. And I went in Jersey to it's a really high-end conservative temple, which probably all it was missing was the mechitza down the middle, but it was conservative. And, they tried to say to me, well, you're a woman, you need to stay in the kitchen while the men do that. I go, no, this is a conservative temple. And I'm not doing that. I'm doing what I feel and what I want to do. And I've always done it. And you know what? If they see me as a rebel, I really don't care. I love being Jewish. I know everything about it. I'm concerned about Israel these days. I get it, but I'm not a Bible thumper. I'm not going to quote the Tanakh. I'm not going to quote anything. Okay. I'm Jewish and I will die Jewish. And that's just the way it's going to be, but I'm still me first and foremost. And I don't let people point fingers at me, and my family's never done it. There was no shakes off their back when I transitioned, because at that point in my life, it's like, who's going to tell me no? And furthermore, that's the life I was living anyway. I was married to a woman for 20 years. And what are they going to tell me? Right. Don't come around here. I mean, I'm not 10 years old. It's so different when you're older. Right. It's different.
It's funny that you just mentioned there was no mechitza at that synagogue. Mechitza is a divider between men and women, because Zander sent me the title of a book, Balancing of the Mechitza. So I thought that was funny.
I read that years ago. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll have to look into that. That's
And
fascinating.
I mean, you look at Abby Stein. You want to talk about religion? There's somebody to talk to about religion. I mean,
Right. Abby was a Haredi
as a man, right?
man who became
Right.
a woman and is now quite the activist, actually.
Yes, and I'm happy for her more than anything. But she lost a lot to gain a lot, and it's different. It's a different community than when you're growing up here. And again, I didn't have kids. I didn't have a lot of stuff that other people have to take into consideration. And again, my mother built me. Where it came from, I don't know, but built me to be a very, very strong person, and to stand up for what you believe. And again, you can't hide from it, but it's where I am, and I'm proud of where I am, but I don't let it rule me. I don't sit there and read Torah portions. I don't do this. I go to the Jewish holidays. That's it, because it's where I am and it is in my heart, but I'm not living my life the Jewish way. I don't keep kosher. I don't do anything that is going to, and it is, from my opinion, constricting.
Mhm. Got it. So yeah, these have been great. I've been very fortunate to have some very rich and thoughtful conversation with trans people through this work that I've been doing and Zander's been doing. I feel like it's afforded me the opportunity not to walk on eggshells with people who are open-minded, thoughtful, trans, and are willing just to have heart-to-heart conversations. I never felt judged, or you're not using the right language, or you're engaging in some kind of politically incorrect speech, and so therefore I'm going to sort of judge you in that process. And I think that's great for other people to hear as well. You learn so much more in these open conversations than you do in these highly politicized conversations. So I just want to express my appreciation for that, and to both of you for helping people like me have really thoughtful conversations, which I learn a lot, and can then help other people learn a lot as well. So thank you.
And I also think you're talking right here to two people of tremendous substance. Every other day they're changing the labels, they're doing this. What does that matter? Why don't you take the lid off the can? What's inside? And those people don't go that deep to know what's inside. They just throw in labels, and right away you're written off because, oh, you call me sir, you didn't ask what my pronoun was. People are human. They make mistakes. And I tell people to judge by the emotion and the tone. If someone's coming at you vindictive, okay, but if someone doesn't really understand, it truly is an opportunity to educate, although it's not. Trans people, don't have to educate people. I see it differently. I feel if there's 3 or 4 people I can educate, I'm happy, because I also believe my generation is the generation that never had education or had miseducation from the little bit that was out there. And once they understand, because they live life, they're the ones that conform better. They're the grandparents that love their grandkids no matter what's going on. I see this day in and day out. Once they understand it, they come to, this is just my grandchild. I want them to be happy. It doesn't matter what they look like, what they want to do. I want them to be happy. It's coming from a different place than younger people that get so adamant because you don't know the daily labels that are literally changing every day.
My only question about this is, am I going to be criticized for holding a mantle here? I don't know.
Probably.
Right. But anyway, it's a fascinating conversation. I thank you both. And till next time, look forward to engaging you again.
Thank you, David. Great to see you, Seth.
Thank you.